Now, I don't know how good your memory is, but a couple of weeks ago, we were thinking about my sister Naomi. And we were thinking about her very specifically because her and her husband Will have been trying for a baby for a long time. They didn't think they could have one. And that brought us to the story of Abraham and the story of Sarah. Now, they wanted a baby for a long time. And God promised them a baby. He promised them so much more than that. He promised them not only would they have a baby, their baby would be the founder of a great nation who would number the stars in the sky. And let me tell you, try it. That's a lot. Except, well, they couldn't have any children. Sarah had never been able to have children, and so they waited for God to fulfill his promise, and they waited, and they waited, and they waited. Still no baby. Still no nation. Now, where we stopped was that eventually God did give Abraham and Sarah a baby. Eventually, like it took so long that even if Sarah could have had children, she was so old now that she wouldn't have been able to one way or the other. Sarah was 90, Abraham was 100, and God gave them a baby in their old age, a baby that no one could give except God. And this was God showing his power. That baby was called Isaac. Now, can you imagine how important Isaac would have been to them? This was the son they'd been promised, they'd waited for their entire lives, and now we're going to go forward a few years. We don't hear much about Isaac until he was, well, about 20. We're not exactly sure, but about 20 seems about right. Now, Abraham kept serving God. He was faithful to the God who'd given him the thing he desired most, a son. God had also blessed him with money and servants and flocks and sheep and goats and all sorts of other things. Abraham and Sarah were pretty rich. But that little family of Abraham and Sarah and Isaac, they kept listening to, they kept obeying, and they kept being faithful to God. One day, God speaks to Abraham. Now, can you imagine what God must want to say to Abraham? God's given him everything. What else might God want to give to him? The man who's been faithful for so long. Well, that's not how it went down. Not even a little bit. Our story starts today in Genesis chapter 22 and verse 1. That verse says this, that after these things, God tested Abraham's faith. Oh, that doesn't sound too good. Well, how bad could it be? Well, God said, Abraham. And Abraham said, here I am. And then God said, take your son, your only son Isaac, the son you love, and go to the land of Moriah. Kill him there, and offer him as a whole burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about. Wait. What? Kill him there. Yeah, I imagine that's pretty much what Abraham thought too. At this point, we probably need to explain what a sacrifice even is. So what is a burnt offering? Well, it's something that happened in the Old Testament. It was something that was given entirely to God. The animal was killed and it was burnt completely. Later on in the Bible, there'll be rules that God gives for how it was to be done. But here it just meant putting stones on top of one another to form a sort of stone table, and then putting the wood on top and setting fire to the whole thing, so the wood would be burnt up with the sacrifice entirely. It would all be consumed by fire. Now, it seems quite weird to us today. The purpose of the burnt offering was to give something that was pleasing to God, and it was just for him. That here was something valuable like a lamb. I'm going to give it all to you, God, because you are God and you get the best that I have. So, what do you think Abraham did? Did he refuse God? Did he say to God, no? Did he argue with God? Did he say to God, but you promised me a child. You promised me to make a great nation out of me. How will you do that if you kill my son? No. Abraham didn't do any of those things. So, what did Abraham do? Well, the story continues, and it says that the next morning, Abraham got up early and saddled his donkey. He took Isaac and 2 servants with him. They went and they cut wood to make sure that they had enough for the fire, because they didn't even know if there would be any trees where they would be going. Now, look at the obedience of Abraham here. He wasn't hoping that he might not be able to do what God asked him to do. Even though his heart must have been breaking, even though he must have been crying inside, he cut wood down to make sure that he would have no excuses for not being completely obedient to God. Abraham was not trying to get out of this. So Abraham did the only thing he knew that he should do, and that was he obeyed God. So off they go. Abraham, the 2 servants, the donkey, and Isaac, Abraham's beloved son. And Abraham didn't tell Isaac or the servants what was about to go down. So off they went, and they went walking with the wood for the fire on the donkey. And then they made camp, and then they walked another whole day, and then they made camp, and then the next morning they got up and on they went. And on the third day, Abraham looked up and he saw the place that God wanted him to go to. And he told his servants to stay there with the donkey, and he said, "My son and I will go over there and worship God, and then come back to you." So Abraham took the wood from the donkey and gave it to Isaac, and they left the servants and the donkey, and they went up the mountain. Isaac was a little bit confused. He said, "Dad, we're going up this mountain, and I've got the wood, and you've got the fire, but, well, we're missing something. Where is the lamb that we're going to sacrifice?" But Isaac didn't know what was going on. So Abraham said, "God will give us the lamb for the sacrifice." So Abraham and his son went on and came to the place that God had told him about. And Abraham built the altar there. He put the stones made of the pile of wood and put it all on top. Then it got difficult. We read that he then took Isaac and tied him up. We don't read that Isaac fought Abraham. If he wanted to, he could have done. Now, Abraham was, remember, he was about 120 years old. And Isaac was a fit young man, just like me. No competition. Boom, one punch and Isaac would have been free. But no, Isaac must have understood that as much as his father loved him, there must have been a good reason for this to happen. And the only thing greater than his dad's love for his son Isaac was for his desire to be obedient to God. So Isaac let his dad tie him up and then laid him on the wood of the altar. Then Abraham got out the knife. You can imagine what would have gone through both of their minds. Isaac lay there without struggling, without knowing what would happen, and Abraham held the knife over his son, ready to kill him. Now, as Abraham held the knife, when he was about to, a voice came. And the voice came from a messenger of God, an angel. And it said, "Abraham, Abraham." And Abraham answered, "Yes." And the angel continued and said, "Don't kill your son or hurt him in any way. Now I can see that you trust God and that you have not kept your son, your only son, from me." Abraham, probably now crying with relief, untied Isaac and got him down off that altar just as fast as his shaking hands would let him. The knife that was going to be used to kill Isaac now was going to be used to free him, so that Isaac could become the great nation that God had promised Abraham. Then he saw a ram, which is a male sheep, in the thicket, in the undergrowth. It was caught in the bushes. So Abraham went and he took the sheep and he killed it. And then that sheep became the offering to God, the burnt offering instead of Isaac. And Abraham had a name for that place. He called it Jehovah Jireh, which means the Lord provides, because the Lord provided a sacrifice instead of Isaac. Now, what an amazing story of faith all of this is. The faith of Abraham to give when he couldn't understand. The faith of Isaac to trust in his father and God. And sometimes the Bible talks in pictures. Not the kind that are drawn, but the kind you build in your mind that links one thing to something else to show you something. Sometimes the pictures are things that have happened so that we can understand something else in the Bible. And that's part of what happened here. You see, later in the Bible, we're told more about these burnt offerings and what they'd be used for. And one of the uses was to please God when the people of God did something wrong. And they gave an offering to God of great value to help cover their sins for a period of time. That's got a clever word for it, and it's called atonement. Now, much later in the Bible, we read about the Lord Jesus Christ, and it says this: "God, you have had no pleasure in offerings and burnt offerings for the things that people do wrong against you. So you prepared me a body, and I come to do your will, O God. Through this sacrifice, we are purified and made holy." You see, we have this little picture. We have the father Abraham, who was prepared to offer us the very best that he had, Isaac. And God was prepared to offer up the very best that he had, Jesus Christ, who, while being God, is also the Son of God, to be a sacrifice that would be acceptable for the things which people do wrong, which is called sin. But here's the difference. We don't have sacrifices in churches anymore, do we? No. Good thing too. And the reason we don't is because the sacrifice of Jesus was acceptable to God forever. No more burnt offerings, no more lambs and sheep being killed to cover the things that we do wrong. Jesus paid for all of that once and only once on the cross of Calvary. He died as a sacrifice. He knew what was going to happen and gave himself as a willing sacrifice so that we, that's you and me, could be forever with God in heaven. All God asks for now is that we understand that we do things wrong. Things like stealing, lying. We all do them. I do them. You've done them. And we ask God for forgiveness and accept Jesus Christ as our Saviour. Jesus said that he came that we might have life and that we might have it abundantly. A new life, freely, in Jesus Christ. I have it, and I hope that you will know what it is to have that new life as well.